Have you ever heard of a place so sealed off from the outside world that for over 100 years, not a single outsider was ever allowed to marry in? As we unravel tonight's story, I'd like to know, where are you listening from right now and what time is it there? I have a feeling the hour might change how you feel about what you're about to hear. This is the erased history of a mountain settlement where every birth, every wedding, and every death belonged to the same bloodline. The census pages show no strangers. The church records repeat the same handful of names in an unbroken loop. And somewhere in a locked courthouse cabinet, they lay a photograph so unsettling that county officials refused to let the public see it. We'll follow the trail through brittle medical notes, vanished school rosters, and the testimony of inspectors who were quietly warned never to return. This is no campfire legend. It's a case the county itself buried, leaving behind just one final line in an inspector's hand. They would not admit a stranger to their table, nor to their blood. That photograph emerged not through any public archive, but in 1964, when a junior clerk cleaning the courthouse backroom stumbled upon it behind a stack of 1891 property tax records. It had been wrapped in yellowed blotting paper, its corners swollen with moisture. Stamped across the top margin in uneven purple ink were the words, "Not for public display." At first glance, it looked like any formal family portrait of the era. A row of seated figures, another row standing stiffly behind all, posed in front of a painted pastoral backdrop. But the longer you stared, the less you could tell one face from another. The same sharp jawline repeated from one edge of the frame to the other. Eyes slanted at identical angles. Even the hairlines mirrored one another as if someone had copied and rearranged the same features over and over. When the courthouse vault logs were checked, the photograph had no accession number. It appeared in no official inventory, no weddings, no school portraits, no civic dedications. Whoever had placed it there had done so entirely outside the county's normal archiving process. A retired records officer shown the image in private refused to hold it for long. He remembered the family. They came from a settlement east of the main river, people known for never mixing with outsiders. He would not name them, but he recalled one chilling truth. There was no one in that house you could point to and say they didn't belong to the same mother. The 1890 census backed him up. Every household in that settlement bore the same surname. In some entries, the listed parents of a bride and groom were identical, even though the newlyweds were recorded separately. No official comment was ever made. The photographer was never identified, but the painted muslin backdrop was traced to a traveling portraitist who roamed the Appalachian counties between 1888 and 1892. That backdrop appears in other county photographs, but always with clearly distinct faces. No one ever explained why this particular image was deemed unsuitable for display or why it was hidden among unrelated tax files. But the choice was deliberate. It wasn't destroyed. It wasn't even defaced. It was simply placed where no one would find it. The young clerk who stumbled across that photograph in 1964 was given no written order, no signature, no form. To file only a quiet instruction, rewrap it and put it back exactly where you found it. Years later, when someone asked if he had ever shown it again, his answer was soft, almost apologetic. Some things make more sense left in the dark, And so it remains the only known image of that settlement's people, not on display, not catalogued, not named. It exists, yet it does not exist, locked inside a vault meant to preserve the county's memory, and yet kept apart from it. The question has never been settled: was this concealment meant to protect the family or to protect the public? The census book for 1880 is a thick, weighty thing, its stitched spine splitting from years of handling. Each page bears the same neat grid: names, occupations, ages, places of birth inked in the same looping hand. For the township east of the main river, the entries look ordinary at first glance. But in the far left column under surname, one word repeats without a single deviation. For 38 consecutive households. It looks like a clerical mistake until you turn the page and see that in other towns the same surveyor's pen recorded the usual variety, Smith Taylor Carter Miller. But here only one name appears. Over and over. By 1890, little had changed. Births and deaths balanced almost evenly, and still the surname remained the same for every resident except 2 widows whose maiden names were unknown and recorded simply as. In the columns for place of birth mother and place of birth father, there is no variation at all. Every entry is marked "This county." On the courthouse copy, faint marginal notes appear. Private reminders never meant for public view. Next to one household of 9, a pencil remark reads, "Son age 14 identical in feature to father remarkable likeness." 3 similar notes follow, and then stop completely, as if the enumerator had decided it was best not to keep pointing it out. That same enumerator's field diary still survives. In it, he describes the journey as unwelcoming. 2 men met him on the road before he reached the first house, insisting on escorting him to every single household. He was never invited inside. Every interview was conducted at a doorway or from a porch. At that time, it was customary for rural families to offer a government visitor bread and coffee, sometimes even a hot meal. Here, nothing. No gesture of welcome at all. The diary does not accuse, but the change in tone is clear. In the first days, he notes the sound of hogs in a pen, the shape of the ridge, line, the smell of wood smoke. By the last, his entries shrink to bare names and numbers, only what was required. When the completed census reached the county, clerk, nothing in the summary hinted at anything unusual. The consolidation of surnames was noted, but no explanation was sought. At the state level, the pages passed without comment. Statistical oddities meant little unless they affected taxes or land disputes. But even now, looking at those pages, it's hard to ignore the visual weight of them. The same name written again and again in identical cursive, like the tolling of a single bell, one that never changes pitch. No map of the period names the settlement, though a land survey marks it as a tight cluster of shaded squares, all indicating a single family's holdings. The county's oral histories never speak of it. Only the census stands as proof that for at least 2 recorded decades and likely many more, this was a community bound entirely to itself. No outsider entered by birth, by marriage, or even, as the records suggest, by accident. When every name is the same, are we looking at a family or the faint outline of something else entirely? The East Ridge Schoolhouse appears only once more in county records in the 1887 Education Ledger. Its closure is recorded in a single spare phrase, "Instruction discontinued." Attendance irregular. No mention of fire, no flood, no lack of funds. None of the usual reasons. Tell me, have you ever seen a place vanish from the record so completely? If you have, I'd be curious to hear where and what became of it. Sometimes the strangest details are hidden in the most ordinary ledgers. The East Ridge Schoolhouse appears in the county education log between two utterly routine entries, and without context, it might have slipped past unnoticed. It was a plain, one-room frame building set on stone piers, warmed by a single cast-iron stove. 6 neat rows of desks faced tall windows, one side looking toward the dusty road, the other toward the edge of the family's land. The teacher that term was Miss Abigail White. She was only 23, newly trained at the state normal school. 3 of her letters survive, still tucked into the courthouse vault. Her first, written after 2 weeks, is exactly what you'd expect, bright, grateful, praising the children's attendance and obedience. But by late October, her tone had shifted. She wrote that the pupils spoke not only in the same tone but in the same rhythm, as though they had rehearsed their answers before arriving. Whether she asked about arithmetic or history, their phrasing was identical. Even the pauses before speaking seemed to fall as one shadow across the room. They looked alike too. Pale skin, dark hair, the same set to the mouth when concentrating. I cannot tell them apart at a distance, she wrote, save by height. By early November, absences began. Whole groups of siblings missing on the same days with no real explanation. When she visited their homes, as was encouraged to build trust, she was met on the porch and told the children were otherwise occupied. She never stepped inside. Her final letter, dated December 3rd, is brief and unsigned as if written in haste. She announced she would leave her post before the term ended and warned that continued instruction under present conditions is unwise. No further reason was recorded. That winter, the schoolhouse was locked. By spring, boards had been nailed over the windows from the inside. No teacher was ever appointed there again. Years later, a former student gave an interview to a local historian. He recalled how lessons would stop when an elder from the family appeared at the doorway. All the children would rise in unison, speak a short phrase, words he could no longer remember, and sit down again in silence until the visitor left. The schoolhouse is gone now, its stones scattered in the grass. But in the vault, Miss White's 3 letters remain. Faded ink and a clear progression, hopeful, to cautious, to curt. And always that echo, 12 or more voices but only one way of speaking. The county's 1885 medical register holds a single unsigned note for a visiting physician, Dr. R.C. Harrow, an itinerant doctor covering 5 rural townships. His bound ledger still survives the leather, warped the paper brittle. Most of his cases were typical cuts from farm tools, spring fevers, the occasional birth. But mid-year, a string of entries stands out. Over 7 days, Harrow examined 17 people from the East Ridge settlement. These notes are far more detailed than his usual style. He wrote of mirrored curvature of the clavicles of cuspids, aligned in an identical arch of 3 brothers whose torso proportions were nearly identical, differing only in weight. In all his other cases, such similarities among unrelated patients were never noted. Here, he wrote them again and again. The first visit, a boy of 11, complaining of stiff joints, prompted him to remark on bilateral symmetry, unusual for age. The line where he might have asked about family history is left blank. By the third patient, a woman of 28, he stopped recording family history altogether, drawing a diagonal slash through that section. In a narrow margin in smaller handwriting, he added just 2 words: ancestry refused. The location of these consultations isn't described, but a surviving invoice lists porch consultations, suggesting he too was never invited inside. In all his other rural visits, Harrow noted things like temperature lighting, the smell of wood smoke. Here, nothing. On the 5th day, his style changed. Diagnoses reduced to single letters. Treatment plans marked only with symbols: a cirrus for pus, a circle for dietary change, a triangle for observation. At the bottom of one page, a faint, unfinished sentence appears. Not advisable to the rest is lost under a smear of ink. Accidental or not? When the medical board reviewed his ledger decades later, it was filed away under general practice incomplete. No follow-up visit is recorded. No referral. No explanation for why his work there ended so suddenly. I'm curious, have you ever passed a place in your own town, maybe a house or a cluster of buildings, and felt you weren't meant to walk closer? If you have, I think you'll understand what Dr. Harrow might have felt. The only record we have of what Dr. Harrow truly saw in Eastridge is locked inside the choices he made, what he wrote, and what he refused to write. He left entire lines blank where family histories should have been. He stayed on porches instead of stepping over thresholds. And in the final entry from that week, there is no patient's name at all, only appearance without deviation from prior cases, speech reserved, declines examination, no fee, no treatment, just nothing. The next page skips ahead to another township entirely, a farmhand injured in a hayloft fall as though nothing had happened at all. But the ledger still sits in the courthouse vault. That strange week on the ridge, bracketed by silence, with one unanswered question pressing in from the edges. What diagnosis could be so dangerous to write, yet too unforgettable to leave the mind? If we turn from the medical records to the parish register of St. Mark's Chapel, 1862 to 1894, the ink tells a different story, but no less troubling. At first glance, the marriages look unremarkable. In small rural parishes, kinship marriages were common. Choices were limited. But when you read the pages in order, the pattern becomes unmistakable. The surname is the same in nearly every line for both bride and groom. In one 1877 entry, the names of the bride's parents are exactly letter for letter the same as the groom's parents. The priests noticed, at least they noticed differently. Father Melrose always wrote every parental name in full, no matter how many times it had already appeared. Father Dantong often left those lines blank, replacing them with a short horizontal stroke. Then there are the marriage banns. The announcements meant to be read aloud to the congregation so anyone could object. For Eastridge, they were sometimes posted on the chapel door, but never spoken from the pulpit. No reason recorded. By the late 1880s, civil marriage certificates joined the church entries. They show the same names, the same repetitions, sometimes identical to certificates issued 20 years earlier. One clerk, Ezra Thorne, processed many of them. His careful handwriting never wavered, never crossed out. Yet his annual reports list fewer marriages than the population would suggest. One certificate in particular, June 12, 1892, shows 2 witnesses' signatures in the same hand, likely the groom's. The bride's signature matches it in style and pressure, as though both had been taught by the same person at the same desk. Reading these records in sequence is disorienting. Names loop back on themselves. A father in one entry becomes a groom in the next, then returns as a father again. The tree doesn't branch, it folds in on itself, a closed circle, inked carefully into the parish book. No corrections, no marginal notes. Just the clasped register still locked tight. And the real question isn't whether the priests noticed. It's why once they did, no one tried to open the circle. Even the county tax rolls for 1885 whisper the same refrain. Beside one property on the eastern ridge, assessment made at entry, not invited in. Porch only, a note so rare it catches in the eye. Assessors usually worked at kitchen tables, ink pulling in the warm light of a window. But here, porch only. It makes me wonder if you were the assessor ledger in hand, standing on that porch with the door closed behind your host. Would you step forward or keep your feet on the boards? The house on the ridge was 2 stories of sun-bleached clapboard shutters drawn tight despite the August heat. When the assessor came, the door was opened not by the owner, but by a younger man whose face was so like the older man who soon joined him that for a moment the assessor mistook them for brothers. Same narrow jaw, same deep-set eyes, even the same uneven part in their dark hair. The visit should have gone the way they always did. An exchange of courtesies, a few notes taken at the kitchen table. But the older man stepped onto the porch and closed the door behind him, taking a position between the assessor and the entryway. The younger man stayed inside, framed in the dimness, standing motionless. When the assessor asked about acreage, the older man recited the exact figure from last year's roll, down to the half acre, without so much as a glance at any paper. When the assessor glanced past him, the younger man's eyes were fixed not on the visitor, but on the older man's back as though awaiting instruction. 3 times the assessor directed questions toward the younger man. 3 times. The older man answered instead. It was as if there was only one voice between them. In his notes, the assessor underlined the phrase "kept on porch" 3 times, then added in smaller script, 2 men exact likeness, only one voice. The valuation stood unchanged for the next 5 years. Whatever lay behind that door stayed in the shadows. A different kind of record tells the rest or hints at it. Pritchard's General Store kept immaculate books from 1881 to 1893. Every purchase from the Ridge account was in exact multiples of 7. 7 loaves, 7 pounds, 7 bolts of cloth. Even nails and lamp oil carefully tallied in 7s. The pattern never broke, not for 12 years. Salt became flour in spring. Coffee became molasses in winter, but always in 7s. Once a neighboring shopkeeper tried to sell them 11 sacks of flour when the usual 7 had sold out. The offer was refused. The customer walked away empty-handed. The account ended in August 1893, 7 pounds of coffee, 7 bars of soap, 7 pounds of lard paid in full. And then, the name disappears from the ledger as if the ridge itself had stepped back into the trees. The pattern, 7s in the store ledger, So consistent it feels ritualistic. The silence. Pre-dawn wordless burials with no clergy, no outsiders, no record. The vanishing. The midwife who delivers a ridge child and then simply ceases to exist in the public record. What makes it effective is how each thread mirrors the others in tone. Measured, deliberate repetitive actions. The ledger. The burial shovels the locked door. An absence where presence is expected. No clergy, no coroner, no footprints. A narrowing of the circle until only those belonging to the settlement remain. If we keep going in this style, we can lean harder into the archival investigator voice, the pulling records from drawers and finding gaps rhythm. That lets the horror build through implication rather than spectacle. Here's how I'd continue your text without breaking the style. Mrs. Loach's disappearance was noted in the constable's log, but no formal missing persons case was opened. The margin bears a penciled note in another hand added years later. Presumed moved west, no kin remaining. Yet, her belongings were never claimed. Her cottage never sold through the county register. By the next winter, the roof had begun to sag under the snow. By spring, the shutters hung open, the wind moving the curtains. No one in the surrounding districts recalled seeing her again. The child she delivered appears in no later census. The surname is there in 1900, plenty of it, but no boy of the right age, no household with an extra son. Either the record is wrong or the boy never lived past his first year. A page in the county school board ledger for 1901 lists enrollment for the eastern districts. Where every other column records names, ages, and attendance, the column for the Ridge Schoolhouse contains only the figure 7 repeated for each month from September to May. No names, no ages, just the number. You've now deepened the thread from insular oddity into something that feels like a closed loop where outsiders vanish, structures collapse under inexplicable circumstances, and any approach toward intimacy is met with matter-of-fact refusal. This section works because you've layered physical absences. The barn erased the home, locked the wagon passing, without stopping. Erased records, ledgers with blanks, logs with terse phrases, and the sudden vanishing of names from rosters. Repetition as code. The same carved initials on every bench, the mirrored refusal of marriage and mingling. If we keep building this, the danger could become less about violence and more about absorption, as if anyone who crosses into that circle of sameness is either erased or incorporated in a way the outside world can track. The barn's perfect circle of benches is a particularly potent image for that. Here's a continuation in your tone that subtly ties the merchant back into the settlement's broader pattern, without answering too much. Jonathan Eaves's name appears once more in county records in a brief note in the 1893 road maintenance log. It lists the recovery of a broken wagon wheel from the eastern slope owner, unknown, though the iron rim matches those sold in his district. No report accompanies the find, and no wagon, matching its description, is ever registered as damaged or abandoned. That same spring, the Ridge Store ledger resumes its monthly totals, but for the first time in 2 years, a second hand has made entries in the margins, short, precise notations in a cramped script. On 3 pages, the number 7 is underlined twice. On the final page before the handwriting reverts, a single word is written in the corner so faint it is almost lost to the paper's age. Hours. In Jonathan Eaves's records, the girl's name never appears. Not in the business books, not in any county records of the time. Her existence is hinted at only in gaps. A stop scratched off the route a season of goods missed, and the vague statement lost over the years. She has never met anyone who is not a relative, and probably never will. In 1897, the name Eastridge appears again, this time in a lawsuit, land dispute, Lot 14. 2 plaintiffs, 2 defendants, same last name. The land is only 42 acres, wooded slopes, narrow pastures, a small lake. The real value, just the fact that it is adjacent to other family lands. In the countryside of those days, disputes of this kind were usually settled in the kitchen or the county clerk's office. But this time, things moved into the courtroom where the evidence was the genealogy. Both sides submitted genealogies written on the same lined paper in even ink, stretching back 6 generations and stopping at the same couple settlers on the ridge before the county was even established. Every branch, every marriage, every name matched. The birth dates were identical. The handwriting was even as if copied from the same source. The judge asked. Both sides insisted. This genealogy is correct, remembered and copied from family records. Neither admitted that they were actually telling the same story. The result. There was no basis for a determination. Both became co-owners, returning to the no boundaries that had existed all along. In the clerk's notebook in the margin was a note. Dispute between cousins, the word cousin was underlined twice. Time passed, the land was abandoned in the middle of the 20th century. The 2 genealogies still lie side by side in the vault, like 2 mirrors indistinguishable. The question still lingers. If the branches of a tree always point back to the same root, is there an other side? In 1893, in the County Relief Commission files, there was a brief entry photograph, Eastridge, with grant records. But today, none of them remain. Only one test sheet got lost in an old envelope found decades later. In the photo, 7 people sitting in the front row, 3 standing in the back. The arrangement is normal, but the faces are not. Each chin is narrow and sharp like the same shape. The deep, slightly slanted eyes, the thinly pursed mouth are terrifyingly similar. Even the shoulder posture is repeated as if all were adjusted to a single model. The photographer Elmer Vance noted uniformity of feature twice. No such note is found in any of his other sets of photographs. 2 negatives were lost en route to the State Charity Commission. On the envelope containing the test prints, someone had written in red pencil, "Do not exhibit." No one claimed to have given the order. A former employee, when questioned in 1921, replied, "The pictures don't fit what we want the public to see." When pressed for reasons, she said it wasn't because of poverty. In 1902, the minutes of the County Board of Health read, "Ordered to remove and seal property at Eastridge for 10 days. Unfit for habitation." No photos, no inspection records, no witnesses. The land had belonged to a family that had lived there for generations. But since 1894, no births have been recorded since 1892, and after 1898, no deaths. Yet the 1900 census still recorded 9 residents, all with the same surname. Where are you listening to this story? And what time is it on your watch? Perhaps if you were sitting listening in the middle of the night, you would feel more clearly the cold of the last house with a light on, before everything disappeared from the records.